Now, Obama got the U.S. involved in a war in Libya without seeking congressional approval, something that his Justice Department claims is within the presidential powers as commander-in-chief when it comes to limited military interventions. But with the news today that the U.S. now could consider placing troops on the ground, it's hard to see how anyone can try to continue to argue that this is, in fact, not a war. And even the critics within Congress have mostly fallen mute as they deal with the prospects of a government shutdown. But there's one man who's determined not to let Obama get away scot-free. Yesterday, Bruce Fein introduced an article of impeachment against the president, writing that he has mocked the rule of law, endangered the very existence of the republic and the liberties of the people, and perpetrated an impeachable high crime and misdemeanor. So here to discuss it with me is Bruce Fein, former Reagan administration official and chairman of American Freedom Agenda. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
First of all, Obama's Office of Legal Counsel released a memorandum this week where basically they gave their legal explanation for why they think it's fully within the president's powers to conduct this type of limited intervention without congressional approval. So why can't anybody agree on this, on the legality here? Because obviously you disagree with them.
Well, the memorandum styled by the Office of Legal Counsel is an arm of the Department of Justice. And what's remarkable about the memorandum is that it doesn't cite anything with regard to the language of the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, the ratification debates, the Federalist Papers that amplified on the meaning of Commander-in-Chief, stating, as the Founding Fathers understood, Commander-in-Chief meant you could lead the Army and Navy. They didn't have an Air Force at the time. And it was described as an inferior power to even governors who could lead the militias. It was explicitly said, unlike the British king who could declare war, only Congress could change the nation from a state of peace to war. And this memorandum prepared by the Department of Justice doesn't cite any of that. Indeed, it says this long train of presidential unilateral authority began when? 1986. That doesn't seem very long in the Republic of the United States. It began in 1776, like 230-some years ago. And so what we have here is a department that cites its own commentary of former attorneys generals. Not a single Supreme Court decision, not a single decision made by the Founding Fathers, practiced by George Washington, the first president, Thomas Jefferson, third president, James Madison, father of the Constitution. Well, it is a concoction that is totally and completely hollow. And with regard to your statement about war, the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Gates, said in congressional testimony, well, of course, if someone threw a Tomahawk missile in New York City, we're at war. And it was asked, well, then aren't we at war if we do the same in Libya? And he said, yes.
Of course we are at war, and that's why I can't believe that anyone would still try to deny it. But let's go back. You're speaking about the founding farmers here, right? Some of our first presidents. Let's go back to more recent history. You also said that perhaps Obama has been more bold than any other president in the way that he's acting. But let's look at perhaps Clinton. What about Clinton and what we did in Bosnia and in Kosovo here, too?
In those cases, there's no doubt that, in my view, they were flagrantly unconstitutional wars. In fact, with regard to Bosnia, Clinton asked Congress for a declaration. He couldn't get it. He then bombed anyway. And I would agree it wasn't quite as flagrant as Obama for this reason.
Just because he didn't even ask, period? I mean, isn't that almost worse if you ask and then they say no?
No, but here Obama, no. The reason is, I understand facially that may seem inconsistent, but here President Obama said, I talked to the Arab League, and Arab League endorsed it. Then I talked to the UN Security Council. And moreover, what was even more dangerous was not only the particular instance of Libya, but his openly stated, and his Department of Justice agreed, he had the authority to go to war to ensure what he says is the effectiveness and efficiency and credibility of the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council doesn't make a cameo appearance in the United States Constitution. He has no authority to use a treaty to trump the United States Constitution. And you could imagine, if his threshold for unilateral war is the oppression in Libya, you've got 80 to 90 countries in the queue for him to invade. Try North Korea, Iran, Zimbabwe, or whatever. And that's why I'm saying the danger from this precedent is worse than with regard to Clinton, because he wasn't making these large pontifical pronouncements suggesting, and he was going to do this forever. There were no limits in terms of what he decided was the national interest that would justify him going to war.
Okay, but Bruce, do you think that this actually has a chance of working? You said that you have a few Congress members that, that like the sound of this. I want to know who they are, because I feel like initially when we did, you know, when the UN Security Council did pass this resolution for a no-fly zone, for all other necessary measures, we did hear some outspoken voices, and suddenly they've all fallen fairly mute, except for perhaps with the exception of Rand Paul. I don't hear anybody talking about this anymore.
Well, listen, certainly the preoccupation at present is the budget crisis and the shutdown of the government. And moreover, because we have become an empire for so long, there's something jarring about suggesting, oh, I mean, we don't have a president who can go anywhere in the world he wants. But that's how even I've worked through all impeachments since Nixon. This is my 4th one. And even at that
You're
stage...
an expert these
yeah,
days.
The only impeachment I haven't done was Andrew Johnson in 1868. I'm not quite that old. But the fact is, even with regard to the Watergate crisis and Nixon, it took months before the public was able to realize the danger of a president who says, if I do it, it's legal. And it will take that long, as my judgment is, with regard to the crystallization of opposition to President Obama. Now, I have been on many radio shows and television shows, and I'm up in Congress. I'm not going to identify the members just because it's their privacy. They like deliberation without being flashed on the scene, if you will, before we have actually an official introduction in the House Judiciary
I don't agree with
Committee.
that. If they're thinking that the president should be impeached, I want to hear about that. It's not their privacy. This is a public matter.
I understand,
they
but
were
there's
elected
prudence.
officials.
Yeah, I understand.
Right? I have to wrap it up, unfortunately, Bruce,
okay.
because we're out of time. But I want to thank you very much for joining us. And, you know, I think it's definitely something that needs to be discussed, at least, because I'm very unhappy with what the president's done here, too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.